Hi, I'm Jennifer Stigelmayer, and today we're going to be interviewing Diane Moore, a biological consultant with Moore Consultant. She specializes in wetlands, permits, and endangered species, which are extremely important when buying or selling property in rural areas. Some things that we'll touch on today are wetlands, vernal pools, Swainson hawk, and different endangered species that can inhabit properties in rural areas. Hi, I'm Jennifer Stigelmayer. We're out here in Wilton with biology consultant Diane Moore, and she's just going to give us a few tidbits on looking for properties in rural areas. Thank you for being out here with us today, and happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Starting off with, what is a biological consultant and what is your area of expertise?
Well, a biological consultant works for whether it's developers building subdivisions or some city or county building a new road or a Costco or a new Amazon building. Somebody that helps those developers facilitate their projects by making sure that they are trying to make sure they don't get into trouble with impacting biology without the appropriate permits. Biologists also help farmers because farmers also need to not break environmental laws.
Disturb any habitats?
Or they shouldn't, yeah.
How do people go about finding you and getting your services?
Well, often, as far as me, I'm too busy now, but people looking for biologists, generally a county or a city has a list of biologists that have worked in the area for various properties. And you could always go into a city planning office and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing a project nearby. Do you have a list of biologists?
And who compensates you for that? Is it the landowner, the farmer, the developer? How do you receive your compensation?
Well, most consultants bill hourly. So usually for a client, we provide an estimate of what it'll cost, and then we bill hourly for the job. So sometimes I'm being paid by the government. Sometimes I'm being paid by a farmer. Sometimes I'm being paid by some guy looking to buy a property.
Okay, so when buying or selling rural properties, what is it that a biological consultant will do? And how do you know, if a property has a vernal pool or a Swainson hawk?
The first thing, the focus is endangered species and wetlands. And people say wetlands, well, here I am, standing out in this dry area. The plants seem a little bit different, but otherwise it's dry. And people would say, well, heck, I don't have any wetlands. Well, a vernal pool is a type of seasonal wetland. And you can see here that we're kind of in this low area. It's about, a foot higher on each side of us. And in the winter, this area turns into a nice puddle. And it's maybe about that deep. And these very special plants grow. This is a really spiky plant. It's called coyote thistle. And it's very, very common in a well-developed vernal pool. And a vernal pool like this, it could support fairy shrimp, which is an endangered species. And in some areas, it could support the California tiger salamander. So wetlands are difficult in that they're just not that obvious at different times of the year. As I'm walking here, it's all brown and but bang, all of a sudden I'm out of it. And how do I know I'm out of it? And it's because the plants are different and because I'm going up. So one of the first things that I do is I get an aerial photograph, and I look at aerial photographs from different years and look for, is there water standing? And then there's a number of different online databases that you also look at, and maps and things. There's a source called the National Wetland Inventory, and it's sort of this high-level mapping that the government did of areas where wetlands either are presently or were at some time. And so you need to look at all those databases, and I know that's a lot for a realtor to do, but when somebody's buying property in the country, these things can really impact their ability to build a house.
So in a vernal pool, are there always fairy shrimp, or do they always, are they always habitats for the salamanders?
No.
Is there certain tests that you can do so that if you were to possibly want to build, that you could fill these in?
Yeah.
Or do you have to create another vernal pool elsewhere in order to fill these?
Well, I'll tell you, that really depends on where is your project. So if you're out in Sacramento County and you're on a 2-acre parcel, maybe this is a 5-acre parcel, I'm not sure. You could go out and hire a biologist that has a very special permit that goes out and just scrapes the top layer of soil off the wetland. And the eggs of the fairy shrimp they settle on the top of the soil in the summer. And then when the pool fills up again in the winter, the shrimp hatch and swim around. But you can find them by just scratching the surface layer off, or you can come out in the middle of the winter and scoop nets. But you have to have special permits from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to do that. Sometimes you're in an area where you're regulated by some other sort of environmental program. So in South Sacramento County, in some areas, we have what's called the South Sacramento Habitat Conservation Plan. And when you're in an area where the Habitat Conservation Plan is in place, things aren't negotiable. It kind of doesn't matter if you have fairy shrimp or not. You pay a per acre fee for every square inch of wetlands, and you pay a per acre fee for every square inch of the non-wetlands, and they're different fees for the different areas. So it's important to think about, am I in a city? Am I in a county? Is there some other habitat plan? And out in South Sacramento County, if you look at these trees behind us over here, there we have these really tall eucalyptus, and there's a threatened hawk that lives in the area. It comes here in the spring. It's called the Swainson's hawk, and it nests in big trees like that, and it eats mice in grasslands like this. And in some parts of South Sacramento County, or actually in all of Sacramento County, there's an ordinance in place that says if you have some 20-acre parcel and you split it into 5 2-acre parcels, everybody has to pay a big fee for the Swainson's hawk that may or may not be in the area. And it doesn't even matter if it's there. There's an ordinance about the Swainson's hawk in parts of the county. But if you're in a city, that doesn't apply.
And the Swainson hawk can be also mistaken for the red-tailed hawk, correct?
If somebody doesn't know what they're looking for, the Swainson's, it's a large hawk, and it's more brown, and it doesn't have a red tail, and you're not going to see it in December. So it leaves in around September, goes down to Mexico for the winter, and comes back every March and nests.
Is that why they kind of did a whole ordinance and fees along like one line instead of having, somebody come out and see if there's actually a Swanson hawk nesting because of the certain times of year?
Actually in the Central Valley, Swainson's hawks are so widespread, they're really kind of peppered about everywhere. And so to go out and try to prove, hey, I've looked at every tree in this huge area and I'm 100% sure there's no hawks, that's just kind of unrealistic. And for the county, it was easier to pass an ordinance if everybody pays a little bit of a fee, and then they take that money and they go and buy habitat somewhere else and manage it for the Swainson's hawk, and they conserve it forever.
Now, as far as the wetlands and groundwater, are there anything that you look for in that, like, putting in a well, or are there certain areas that you have to apply different measures as far as?
Well, often with like a wetland, there's a requirement, and this can vary, I think, by county, that any well be X feet away from the wetland.
Okay.
And so I just ran into this in Merced County, where both the well and the septic were required to be spaced far away from wetlands. And on that parcel, the buyer was concerned because they had a few different scattered wetlands, and they didn't know where they could fit their septic system.
Well, and also I know that the septic and the well have to be at least 150 feet apart from each other. So that would be kind of tricky if you're on a small parcel or, smaller acreage.
And I mean, on a parcel like we're at now, I can see we've got a vernal pool here. We've got another one over there. But up in this other area, and I looked at an aerial photograph before I came here, it looks like there's ample place to build a house. And so that's the kind of thing, if somebody looked at a parcel like this and said, well, I want to have my house right next to the road, maybe that's not going to be the best thing, because you could get a permit to impact this wetland, but it would take money, it'd take time. And
is that where you come into the mitigation ground, like having to buy or recreate on another piece of property, the vernal pools?
Yes. So with wetlands, a lot of them are regulated by the federal government, and all are regulated by the state. And so if you impact even a very small area of a wetland, and I'm talking about a few square feet, you need to get a permit at a minimum from the state for that impact, and they make you buy a wetland somewhere else and preserve it. That wetland somewhere else has to have been created recently. So there's rules about you can't have a loss of wetlands, and by impacting wetlands in one area, wetlands have to be created in another area, and usually a landowner just pays a check for that to be done somewhere else versus creating their own wetlands.
So as far as impacting the wetlands or vernal pools, beyond building, what would be considered an impact? Would having cattle or putting in an orchard or grape vineyards, would that be a huge, impact on them?
Well, that's a good question. So grazing, if you think about the Central Valley in the old days, we had tule elk all over the place, and they were grazing and they were trampling vernal pools and eating in vernal pools, and grazing and vernal pools evolved together. So grazing a vernal pool is actually a really good thing to do for it environmentally. But as far as a vineyard, if you look at aerial photographs, you'll see that vineyards and orchards in this area, they're not planted through the vernal pools, they go around them. So there's a lot of vineyards and orchards that are planted in these very mosaic patterns. So they'll plant in areas like this, but they won't plant in the vernal pool we were just standing in. And so sometimes when a person is looking at buying, like right now, there's a lot of parcels that were vineyards and they've taken the vines out or they've torn trees out. So a lot of these parcels are starting to come up for sale. And people look at them and they go, well, it was previously farmed. I can do whatever I want here. But that vineyard was often farmed around wetlands that aren't that visible. So
it's just important to be able to look at those maps that you were talking about and see where those wetlands or vernal pools could be, and make sure that you're aware of that, even if you're buying an old vineyard or an orchard that has been removed.
Yes, because sometimes, as I said, when the wetlands, when they're dry and it's a summer, people just don't see them. Or if sometimes if you've farmed hay for years, the question people ask, can you farm hay through a vernal pool? And that question itself is pretty well argued as far as, is it legal? Does it harass the vernal pool? A lot of landowners have been given grief by the government for farming through wetlands, so it's really better to just stay out of them to be safe.
But disking up hay, that's probably one of the arguments, disking up through that and replanting. You're still, yes, you're kind of disturbing it, but on the other hand, you're still creating.
As I said, literally farming hay has been normal farming, like disking is supposed to be exempt from regulation and you're supposed to be able to do it through wetlands. Practically speaking, the federal government has given some farmers in the last 20 to 30 years a lot of grief over it and has sort of launched investigations, most of which fizzle away. But getting into farming and all that,
it's a whole different
thing than somebody that just wants to buy out.
And now the Groundwater Conservation Act. Mm-hmm. What does that entail? And what do you deal with that? Is that in your line of expertise?
No, I only deal with what's called SIGMA, and it's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and different areas, and they're called hydrologic subbasins. They've had to form government groups that are going to figure out how to manage groundwater better. So in this area, recently, we've had taxes actually put on parcels where parcels have to pay a per acre tax if they're going to do irrigated cropland or build a new well. And some property owners out here were quite surprised to get their property bill recently and see this, what is this new assessment? And but it's a new California law that started a few years ago. It mostly just impacts people. I think if you're going to build a well, you have to get a special permit. But groundwater and water rights, that's sort of another topic, versus biology that people need to look at. But it can have costs, especially for irrigated cropland.
And what are the top 3 things that you would recommend an agent or a client looking to purchase property?
I think that some of the top things are to know, when was this parcel I'm looking at created? Is it some parcel that was subdivided 100 years ago? Because if so, it probably has very few restrictions on what you can do where. In contrast, if you were looking at a parcel that was created, like in this area, we have a lot of 10-acre parcels that might have been created from 40-acre parcels 10 years ago. And they could have conditions attached to them about having to be in this Swainson's Hawk program where you're paying a per acre fee for for hawks. So looking at, are there conditions on the parcel related to biology? Of course, you always want to look at, are you in a floodplain, which isn't really biology, but can overlap with wetlands. Another question is, are you in critical habitat for any endangered species? And that's a federal designation. And in this area, we aren't in areas where there's special habitat, like blocks of land that are designated. But more up in the foothills, there's large areas, 50 miles by 20 miles that are protected for the red-legged frog. And that can really limit what you can do. So that's not as much problem around here. But I think the big questions are there wetlands on the property? Do you have a reason to think that there's endangered species? How old is the parcel? And, are there special conditions attached to the title that require me to be in some sort of a mitigation program? Because some of these fees can be $20,000 an acre for Swainson's hawk mitigation. This whole agricultural program that requires, if you're impacting farmland in areas, to provide a per acre fee for that too. And sometimes those things can overlap, but sometimes they don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come out here with me and check these out. It's always nice to be able to educate people, especially agents, when we're selling property or, to clients. We don't want to lead them in a bad direction, and we don't want them to come back to us and say, you sold us this property and we can't even build here. So it's great to have that knowledge, and we really appreciate you and everything that you do. Well, so thank you.
Well, thank you.